As a famous Arab saying goes, without the Nile, Egypt will be a mere desert. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special edition of Les Dessous des Cartes within Gem. Water has always been an eminently strategic issue throughout history, and today's controversy depicts this importance quite perfectly. We will look into the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is meant to be the biggest African dam. However, even though this dam may help Ethiopia to live its renaissance, it may endanger another regional power, Egypt, which is downstream of the Nile. Let's look into the stakes here. The Grand Renaissance Dam is an Ethiopian project that came out on the 31st March 2011 and should be the biggest hydroelectric dam in Africa, with an area of 1,680 square kilometers and an electric production of 6,000 megawatts. This is 3 times more than the current electric capacity of Ethiopia. Egypt fears that the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will radically reduce the Nile's flow. Indeed, it is located on the headwaters of the Blue Nile, which is the leading source of water for the north flowing Nile. Because the Nile is Egypt's lifeline in its desert environment, the reliance on its flows are critical downstream. Sudan, another downstream country, is in the middle of the tensions between Egypt and Ethiopia. At the beginning hostile towards the project, it began to support it in 2013, since it was promised by Addis Ababa to receive a part of the electricity produced by the controversial dam. A big geopolitical shift is being played out along the world's longest river. Indeed, the Nile has always been the axis of economic development and therefore a source of geopolitical tensions. This dam could be the source of cooperation between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, but is much more likely to trigger a war over water unless Ethiopia can make a deal with Egypt and Sudan about the rate of the dam's filling. Indeed, Ethiopia wants to fill it quickly to amortize this huge investment of $5 billion, which represents 7% of their GDP. Let's now look at the stakes for Ethiopia. We're talking about the most ambitious infrastructure project of Africa that could turn Ethiopia into Africa's water powerhouse. It employs 8,500 laborers. It is financed by China's ICBC, a state-owned bank that is also the world's biggest bank, by tax collection, and by treasury bonds, since the World Bank refused to fund the project. Ethiopia has made a strategic choice, which is reinforcing its independence. 600 million people on the continent are not connected to the grid, as well as 83% of the Ethiopians. Only 3% of its hydropower potential has been developed. That is why the country decided to build the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Let's now take a look at the benefits for Ethiopia. Without electricity, there won't be industrialization in Africa. Electricity is a crucial source of income and industrialization. Indeed, industrial parks are being built as Ethiopia seeks to transform itself into a middle-income country. And so, it eminently needs electricity. Thanks to the Renaissance Dam, the country could earn $1 billion a year from electricity exports. Considering that the national GDP is $72 billion, this might be a very lucrative business. Ethiopia could be the largest power exporter in Africa. The country is trying to reproduce an industrialization strategy following the Chinese example. In other terms, the country is trying to escape from the so-called resource curse. China helped Ethiopia to build its dam, providing the technical and financial help. Ethiopia is a land of opportunities for Chinese investors. Many companies are engaged in Ethiopia in developing the country's hydropower potential. As a matter of fact, China is already outsourcing a part of its industry in Ethiopia and Sudan, hence its support to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and to Omar el-Bashir's regime. China's companies account for 12% of the African industrial production and 50% regarding infrastructure. 1/3 of the Ethiopian population is living under the poverty threshold. The population growth is 2.4% and 85% of the population are farmers. In other words, the country has not yet begun its demographic transition. Its urbanization, which is the key of development, is still limited. That is why the country will need financial incomes in order to face the challenges in literacy, in giving access to the grid, and reducing the poverty. Let's now look at the stakes for Egypt. But first, let's remind the historical context. Egypt was the gift of the Nile, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, in the 5th century before Jesus Christ. In 1929, Egypt and the United Kingdom, on behalf of Sudan, agreed to allocate minimum flows to the two countries, 66% for Egypt and 22% for Sudan. This agreement declared their natural and historic rights to water from the Nile, and also stating the upstream nations had to consult them over construction projects. In 1959, following tensions over the construction of Nasser's Aswan Dam in Egypt, Egypt and Sudan agreed to allocate the flow of the Nile between them, excluding upstream countries. For thousands of years, and more recently thanks to British colonialism, Egypt has wielded the political influence over the Nile, but Ethiopia's ambitions is changing all that. There have been talks about a dam on the Blue Nile for many years, but when Ethiopia started to build in 2011, the Arab Spring was underway and Egypt was destabilized. Egypt is an African heavyweight. It has the largest African army, it is the second African economy, and obviously, it has a prestigious historical legacy from the pharaohs. Nevertheless, the Blue Nile is a river originating in Ethiopia and is one of the two major tributaries of the Nile. Indeed, it provides the Nile 59% of its water. Egypt is situated downstream, and the Nile provides 90% of its drinking water. When you do the math, you can guess that the dam will therefore have catastrophic effects on the Egyptian agriculture and industry. Moreover, Egyptian diplomacy considers the Nile water as a national security issue for Egypt. Let's now look at the consequences. As you can guess, cooperation and consensus, or outright war, are the only two possible outcomes. Let's decipher the geopolitical strategies to get a better understanding. At the beginning, Sudan was hostile towards the project, but in 2013, it changed its stance towards the dam, expressing support for its construction. President Omar al-Bashir claimed that his country's approval for the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam was driven by economic, not political reasons. The reason why Omar al-Bashir changed his opinion seems to be to secure Addis Abeba's and especially Beijing's support before the International Court of Justice. Indeed, the ICJ has issued an arrest warrant against Bashir on charges of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Another reason is that dams regulate the flow of the river and prevents floods. At the moment, the difference between high water and lower level in Sudan is 8 meters. It is crucial to regulate the flow, and with the Renaissance Dam, the difference will be reduced to 2 meters. That being said, cooperation is possible in the Nile. The Nile Basin Initiative is an organization that unites Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, and the world's newest country, South Sudan. Neutral, it seeks the consensus and a fair agreement between the said countries. Another important organization is the African Union that unites all the African countries. It aims to reach an agreement between Ethiopia and Egypt and to prevent war by promoting dialogue. Its mantra is, war is a poison for development. However, war is not excluded, unfortunately. It is often said the world's next world war will be fought over water, and there are few localities as tense as the Nile River. Egypt declared that it is ready to use any means to defend its interests. Being the largest African army and a dictatorship, a war and victory is always comforting for a junta. Obama once famously said that just because we have the best hammer does not mean that every problem is a nail. Well, if diplomacy fails in this controversy, it is highly probable that Egypt will use the biggest African hammer to sell the Ethiopian nail. As we saw together, this dam could generate another conflict in a continent that already had its fair share of disarray. At the end of the day, this controversy will test the credibility of the African Union to solve conflicts in Africa, for this organization craves to be as integrated as the EU. It also shows the yearning of African leadership. Many countries want to get out of poverty and instability that lasted for too long and leave their Renaissance.